remember this man or what he said?
We had already decided our success signal before advancing for the attack, and it was like Bravo Company's success signal, "Woh aaya," which was passed to our CO Colonel Joshi on the radio set. And after the another bunker was captured, my company's success signal was "Ye dil mange more." The guys were so highly charged up that they're wanting that some more bunkers should have been there, and we would have got the more chaps.
They were words that moved a nation. Words that brought out the fighting spirit of a young breed of Indian soldier. Young men tasked to do what military observers felt was impossible. Climbed near vertical surfaces to take on dug-in enemy soldiers in a war to liberate a part of India. It happened in the summer of '99, in a war broadcast to your homes, a war taking place far, far away in the mountains of Kashmir. A war which was now just a click of your TV remote away. It was a war that regenerated patriotism, pride in the nation, pride in the ability of 20-something soldiers who didn't think twice about marching to their death. India had a new set of young heroes: Vikram Batra, Yogendra Singh Yadav, Manoj Pandey, Sanjay Kumar.
दुश्मन के पास पहुंचने पर हमने हमारा और दुश्मनों का आमने सामने हमारा फाइटिंग हुआ और करीब इस लड़ाई में 5 घंटे का समय लगा। उस समय हमारे केवल दिमाग के अंदर यही था, अपनी पलटन की इज्जत, अपने देश का जो सम्मान है उसको बढ़ाना है, और अपने परिवार वालों का, तो जब हमारा देश सुरक्षित है तो परिवार वाले भी स्वयं सुरक्षित ही होंगे।
They were fighting in a place, in terrain, in climatic conditions as difficult as one can imagine. This was mountain warfare like never before. This is the man who ordered them to fight to the death if necessary. VP Malik was the Chief of Army Staff, the man tasked with the job of commanding the Indian Army as it took on a well-entrenched enemy, an enemy which had infiltrated an area deemed too inhospitable for any significant military assault. Malik knew that war and death are synonymous terms, but it was still his job to give the order to send young Indians into what was the lion's den.
The hardest occasion for me, or the hardest time for me every day, was my first morning briefing, where they gave me account of the casualties of the previous 24 hours. You know, every time you winced when you came to know the number, and you felt bad. I think I can say the same thing for the Prime Minister. So whenever I went and I met the people, then I would ask the commanding officer, who are the people, what have they done? And then they will bring up these young officers or men. And I carried these small gifts, Scotch bottle, a champagne bottle for the officers, and watches or others for the soldiers. And I would give them a pat and a personal appreciation, you know, give them this little gift.
By May 1999, this is what had happened. Taking advantage of the geography of the region, which in many instances favored them, Pakistan Army regulars, accompanied by fully armed and well-trained militants, sneaked into Indian territory to capture heights along the 3 major fronts, Dras, Kargil and Batalik. The initial target was the National Highway 1A, the only viable road link between Srinagar and the Ladakh region. If the highway fell, Ladakh would have been in peril. In order to take the highway and the towns that surrounded it, the Pakistanis captured several features known well now across the country: Tiger Hill, Tololing, Marpola, Mashko, and areas in Jubar and Turtuk, among others.
If the Indian army was overwhelmed at the extent of the Pakistani intrusion, then they were perhaps equally overwhelmed at the sight of a large number of young Indian television journalists arriving at a place where angels fear to tread. This was India's first televised war, but the lingo of the Indian army changed appreciably over the next several weeks. Those young, intrusive, perhaps irritating television journalists were soon seen to be force multipliers, as it became clear that their reportage had a huge impact on international opinion.
And so if the Jawans up front were fighting in a brutal hand-to-hand battle, well behind the front lines, well within the range of Pakistani artillery, another war was being fought. One for control of the airwaves, one which would influence international opinion. All of a sudden, Kargil and Dras became household names as the nation tuned in to catch what was happening on the war front.
A sign of the changed reality in Kashmir. Just a few years ago, standing at this very spot would have been suicidal. In those ridges behind me are Pakistani observation points, and this stretch of National Highway 1A, the lifeline between Srinagar and Leh, comes under their direct line of fire. And during the Kargil War, they used to pick off targets, trucks and vehicles passing by this stretch. To move up and down this stretch of National Highway 1A just short of Kargil often meant travelling at night at great speeds with your headlights switched off.
रात के टाइम लाइट बंद करके आना पड़ता है। लाइट बंद कैसे? क्योंकि अगर हम लाइट जलाएगा वो तो सीधा टारगेट करते हैं लाइट हम गाड़ी को वहाँ पर। लाइट बंद करके पड़ता है। बहुत से गाड़ी को एक्सीडेंट हो गया, वो ड्राइवर मारा गया।
Many of us were fledgling journalists in 1999. Excited at the prospect of covering war, but totally unprepared for what we saw.
What you heard just now were Bofors guns directly firing right on top of Tiger Hills, the prelude to perhaps the final assault on Tiger Hills, which is expected to begin in just a few hours.
Through those dramatic months, places like Dras and Kargil became home for us. As people moved out, we moved in, never entirely sure if the artillery shells that were thudding into the hills around us would have our names inscribed on them.
This part of the Batarik sector where I am sitting right now was actually with the Pakistani introduced just a short while back. In fact, even now they are continuing to shell this region looking for the forward posts which have been formed here. We had a shell going off just a short while ago. Looking at the terrain behind me indicates just why the fight here has been so difficult. Climbing up these rocky faces would, at the best of times, have been very difficult. With somebody sitting up there shooting down...
The stories we brought you were authentic first-hand accounts of the battle happening just a short distance away.
Dras is all about being in the line of fire. Behind me was once a temple. This was destroyed by artillery shelling from across the line of control. But this situation is changing. The army says that the situation is improving. As a result of removing the intruders from the highest posts, the army says that people are returning to this area. Dras will once again have a population.
They're going to target directly on top of Tiger Hills, and the role they play is to saturate the targets on top of Tiger Hills by dumping a very large amount of explosives onto the targets in a very short duration of time.
This was war with a human face. The army rarely hesitated in engaging the media. Arjun Ray was the man behind the media campaign. He came up with what the army called MPRUs, or Mobile Public Relations Units. Ray was responsible in taking selected journalists to see firsthand what was happening.
I also worked out arrangements as to how we could improve the cooperation between the army and between the media. And I never had any problems on this particular count. And another feature of our media plan was that whenever a journalist came back, even if he was from an international agency, I always debriefed them to get a feedback on what problems they faced, on what was their opinion of what was happening at the combat, in the combat zone. And I think such like deviations from standard methods of dealing with media paid off extremely well. And I think the other very important thing I would like to underscore is that I found that our media was extremely responsible. We had a few odd glitches here and there, but I think on a scale of 10, I would say 9.5, the Indian media was credible, they were extremely responsible, and therefore there was no requirement for us to debar them from moving into particular areas. There was no requirement for us to censor what they were saying, and there was no requirement to patronize these correspondents who were going up to report on what was happening. And I think we trusted them and they trusted us.
But if Roy was controlling the media campaign, the people most affected were men like Colonel V.N. Thapar, for whom every moment felt like a lifetime. Like thousands of other families out there whose sons and daughters were fighting for their country, Colonel Thapar knew that there was a chance he would never see his son again. Today though, the Colonel is a proud man. His son may be gone, but Vijender Thapar, like so many others, has earned the respect of a nation.
The spirit which won the day in Kargil is quite evident in my son's last letter, which he wrote 2 hours before he left for the attack. I'll read it out. Dearest Papa, Mama, Birdie and Granny, by the time you get this letter, I'll be observing you all from the sky, enjoying the hospitality of Apsaras. I have no regrets. In fact, even if I become a human again, I will join the army and fight for my nation. If you can, please come and see where the Indian Army fought for you tomorrow. As far as the unit is concerned, the new chap should be told about this sacrifice. I hope my photo will be kept in the A Company, Mandir with Karni Mata. Whatever organ can be taken should be done.
The little hamlet of Dras today, some of the most crucial assaults, including the attacks on Tiger Hill and Tololing, were launched from here. Today it's a busy little place, not unlike small towns in other parts of the country. Just a few years after the assault on Tiger Hill, we came across a group of tourists who've come all the way from Colombia.
What about a place like Dras? It's very small, but why do you come to Dras?
Tiene su belleza, tiene su encanto, la gente es hermosa, el paisaje es hermoso.
Beautiful people and landscape is beautiful. And
are you enjoying yourself?
Oh, definitely. It's very nice to see other cultures, other religions, other ways to see their life.
Did you know there was a war over here?
Sí, he escuchado.
And that doesn't worry you to come here?
¿No te preocupa eso? ¿No te asusta?
Why?
Me parece que es un país tranquilo, sereno.
Que en general es, in general, is a country very peaceful.
Okay, so no worries, no problems, no concerns?
No worries.
This is the Dras that I remember.
This is the same town from where the decisive attacks against Tiger Hill were launched in 1999. Dras is today boom town. Everything seems to be available over here. There are tourists from Colombia who we ran into a little while back. Well, during the Tiger Hill operations, there was one dhaba in this entire town which was open. And that dhaba is still around. It's Hotel Chand. And we're going to go have a cup of tea with its owner. Chand Sahab, एक कप चाय. Chand Sahab, एक चीज बताइए, कारगिल युद्ध जब हो रहा था, आप यहाँ क्यों रुके?
क्या फर्क है सर, इसलिए यहाँ रुकना पड़ा.
और कहीं नहीं जा पा रहे?
और कहीं जा नहीं सकते, ना इधर जा सकते थे ना उधर जा सकते. गाड़ी वाले यहाँ रुकते भी नहीं थे, सीधे जाते थे ऊपर. हाँ. सीधा नीचे ऊपर. मैं बोलता सर चाय भी ले लो. नहीं चाय नहीं पी, सीधा ही निकलते थे इधर उधर.
और बमबारी सारे दिन रात चलता था?
रात दिन इतना चलता था कि कहीं 20-25 कहीं बम आते थे.
डर नहीं लगता था आपको?
डर तो लगता था. पेड़ यूँ करता था, चलता था, क्या करता. मजबूरी है, ना इधर जा सकते ना इधर ना तो राशन मिलता था अच्छे से. यहाँ तो कई पत्थर आते थे, दरवाज़ा बंद करते थे इधर, तो फिर यहाँ बैठते थे. कोई कस्टमर आते थे, या फौजी आते थे या पेपर वाले आते थे आप लोग. और कोई नहीं आता था. लोकल आते थे 2-4 जो है कि गाय को संभालने के लिए जी, वो आते थे. मैं कोई सब्जी कुछ नहीं मिलती, पर खाली चावल मिलता था. चावल या ये गेहूँ का आटा ये मिलता था. वैसे खाने को तो मिलता था फिर.
If there was ever one word to describe the Kargil War, it would have to be extreme. Even today, after countless stories on the war, there is nothing more astounding than the fact that Indian soldiers actually managed to climb those heights. And that their stories of unbelievable courage are all true. Stories of how they encountered fierce resistance from Pakistani soldiers who could fire down on them and shoot them to pieces. The lucky few who survived the hail of bullets went on to close-quarter combat with the Pakistanis. By the time these men had made it to the Pakistani posts, they were injured, battered and hungry, but desperate to end the combat and win back what was theirs.
The enemy commander, after Zulu Spar, he wanted his dead bodies back. And he requested me, Colonel Mustafa of 19 Frontier Force. He requested our post commander. I said, okay, you will get the bodies back. But what will you do? He says, sir, I'll go back. I'll leave that area and go back towards Kultari, 1.5 kilometers. You don't have to fight. Thereafter, I'll go back. I said, okay, I'll give you your bodies, 3 bodies back. Next day, you'll come, send your people and collect those bodies. But with proper honors, not otherwise. The bodies were handed over with honor. But when I checked back, I said, how do I take your word? He simply said, sir, I'm a Pathan. And that was it. And he went back, and I think so he kept his word.
Kargil was the start of a new chapter for the Indian Army. And the causes of the war and the reasons why intelligence agencies were unable to detect the Pakistani intrusion resulted in profound changes in the structural thinking of the Indian Army. More than anything else, it was a lesson to the armed forces that no region of India, no matter how extreme, could be left unattended. It was a lesson learnt the hard way through the lives of more than 600 Indian officers and Jawans killed fighting on the Kargil front. But perhaps the biggest positive factor of the day was the character of the Indian Jawan, who seeks nothing but willingly gives everything, including his life. It was these men with a host of young officers leading from the front that enabled the Indian Army to achieve this.